Just wanted to say, Brandon, you ended a 9-year drought of female student or male student of the year award winners. So we had Sean Devan was our first one, and is working for us now. So it's a hard award to get. And I want to say what everybody says, but this is true. We could have looked across this student body, this class, and picked, thrown a dart at the dartboard and picked a person that would have easily, we could have promoted as a student of the year. They are such a great class of kids, and I'm really proud of all of them. That sounds so cliche, but I really am. You know, when we hear that Rebecca's one of the finest people you've met in 57 years, we have extraordinary students. The program is hard, and there's no place to hide. And we are deep in their lives, and it's working. We have National Merit Scholars, we have Schreier Honor Scholars, and the academic program is working. You don't have to work kids to death to give them life and success in life. I want to introduce Jared Seckler, who is extremely important to me. He's one of my best friends, person I work with every day, and a person that's for the first time in my life I've been able to hand my baby over for somebody else to run it. And Jared's run the school this year. He's ahead of the school, and I'm not there as much as I used to be, for sure. And Jared has taken it, and I think between him and the team, this has been maybe the best year ever. So I kind of try to stay out of the picture as much as possible. You know, Jared is the kind of guy that asked me a couple years ago, hey, he used to be a youth pastor for 11 or 12 years, and he said, can I start a youth group? You know, can we start a youth group here? And I don't have to get any extra pay, but can we start one? So he started one called 242 on Wednesday nights, one of the best youth groups in town, and he does it for free. And I think it's a terrific model, and it shows that what Jared does in his free time is work with kids. That's what he does for fun after a day of working with kids. He's the kind of guy that took my car and drove it into took the doors of the school off and drove it into the reception area with about a ½ inch to spare. I'll say this. I discovered something in the David and Goliath story a few months ago, that when David was going to meet King Saul, the reason he was going was because he was supposed to deliver a few things. One of them was 10 different cuts of cheese and 10 different breads. He was a cheese delivery man, and that's what he was doing, is his act of service. Jared is one of the few people I know that's willing to deliver cheese and bread and then can still go on and have the courage to slay the giant. There are few people that are so gentle and compassionate and have such high integrity as Jared, and I'm extremely honored to have him running the school. And parents, you should be too. If your student if Jared has walked with your student, you know what a fine man he is. So he's going to speak to us for a while, and we'll hear what he has to say. How about that? Jared Seckler.
They all know I like to walk around, and I spit a lot while I speak, so they're just getting out of the way. You know, I would tell you, I might say that you wouldn't believe me if I told you that I didn't know what Ray was going to talk about and what Bob was going to talk about and what Larissa was going to talk about. But if you know those three, you never know what they're going to talk about, so you'll probably believe me. But I didn't know what they were going to share. But I would like to tie together Larissa's stories and Bob's talk on vision and humility and Ray's shoes. I really had that planned in my talk today. We talk a lot about stories at Grace Prep. We believe that our lives are our stories. We talk a lot about being a living letter. which is what Christ has called us to be. And I would ask you today, students and everyone else, what kind of letter are you writing with your life? Because your life is cliche, but it's probably the only Bible, or maybe it's the only Bible that some people will read. So what kind of story are you writing? What kind of story do you want to tell? Hebrews 12:2 says, "Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith." Graduates, the decisions you make today will determine the stories you tell tomorrow. There's a lot of talent sitting in that front row. There's a lot of giftings God has placed in your life. There's a lot of things you could do. You could go far on your own. I've seen you go far on your own in some cases. You're incredibly gifted. But I want to challenge you today to go further than that, to really let God be the author and perfecter of your faith. Today's the day to go. Sometimes in your life you can choose to go. Sometimes you get kicked out. Today you get kicked out. This is it. When it comes to Grace Prep, this is your final day. It's time to go. So I want to talk about going. God called a man named Abram to go in Genesis 12:1. The Lord had said to Abraham, "Leave your country, your people, your father's household, and go to the land I will show you." Think about that. He told him to leave his country, his people, his father's household. Now, some of the students sitting in the room today have done that. They've left their country, they've left their father's household, but most of you sitting in the front row have not. God told him to go, and he didn't even tell him where. He says, "I will show you where to go." You see, to go somewhere else, you need to leave what is comfortable, and you need to leave where you are. Many of you are doing that by going to college. But once you're out of college, I want you to carry this with you, and I want you to begin to trust God to be the author and the perfecter of your faith. And that comes through not big decisions. I'm going to tell you a little bit later about a big decision I made in my life. But to get to that big decision, it was many small decisions in trusting God. When I was 17 years old, I was in high school, and my dad came home with something I'd never seen before. A yellow giant iguana mountain bike. I'd never seen a mountain bike. I had bikes. I'd ridden bikes all my life. This one had 18 speeds. A bicycle with 18 speeds was unheard of. I remember getting on that. His doctor had prescribed that he ride it to help his back problems. And so I remember taking that. We lived at the top of a mountain, and I remember getting on that bicycle, and I remember riding it out the end of our drive and dropping it down into some of the low gears, and like I could climb the little slope of our driveway. I'm like, this thing is amazing. We lived on top of a mountain. I thought, I bet I'd never been off the top of our mountain except by car. And I thought, I could ride this thing all the way a half a mile down to the bottom of the mountain, and I bet I could ride it back up, and I did. That night, I rode at the bottom of the mountain and back. I'm like, that's unbelievable. I just conquered a half-mile mountain. And I thought, you know what? We have this little place called Kaiser's Ridge, and it's about 3.4 miles away, and it was the half mile down, and the rest of the way was up, about 3 miles up. I bet I could ride it all the way there, and I did it that evening. I rode it all the way, 3.4 miles to Kaiser's Ridge and 3.4 miles back. 7 miles. That's like most of the way to Bellefonte from here. That was like, as a junior in high school, that was a life accomplishment on a bicycle. I was amazed. Well, needless to say, ended up getting my own mountain bike, and my dad and I started bicycling and taking trips. That following summer, we did a little trip from Cumberland, Maryland to Washington, D.C. along the C&O Canal, 184.5 miles. We rode our bicycles, just the two of us, and we're like, wow, this is fun. It's father and son traveling by bike. The following summer, we did something a little more aggressive. We left our house. We pedaled down to Roanoke, Virginia, and then up onto Skyline Drive and to the bottom of Skyline Drive. That was a little further than 184 miles. I don't actually remember the number, but it was about a week-long trip, and I remember specifically sitting in a picnic area on the bottom end of Skyline Drive. We had gone to the little camp store that night. We had met a man who was he's famous. He's a few years back, he climbed Everest as a blind man. He was the first blind man to climb Everest. When we met him, he was a blind man hiking the Appalachian Trail, which goes, they call it 5 million steps from Georgia to Maine. A blind man was hiking it. And I met him in the store, and we talked to him. I remember thinking, wow, I'm excited about my little bicycle trip, and here's a blind man walking from Georgia to Maine for 5 months. And I remember sitting at a picnic table that day, and my mom was going to pick us up the next morning. We had a little downhill ride, and she was going to pick us up at the bottom of Skyline Drive. And I remember my dad saying this. He said these words, "We could just keep going." I'm like, "Going where?" He's like, "All the way across the country. We could do it. This is just like, there's nothing to really hold us back." And so that's what we did the following summer. We jumped on a Amtrak train from Pittsburgh, took it 3 days to Seattle, Washington. We got off, and we started pedaling back across the United States. It all started with a ride out my driveway, thinking, wow, this is amazing. I could go a little further. I could go a little further. I could go a little further. Well, I got to tell you, it's one thing to ride the C&O Canal, go down Skyline Drive. As we were sitting 3.5 days on that Amtrak train going 70 miles an hour across the country, looking at what we were going to pedal back, I became very discouraged. I'm like, I don't know that we can actually do this. I really had that thought. But we started. My dad's always said, anything worth doing is worth overdoing. So that first day, we didn't actually start east. We took a ferry out into the Puget Sound and rode around the San Juan Islands. Why? I still do not know to this day. But the following day, we started east. We started east, and about 2.5 days in, we ran into something I'd never heard of, the North Cascades. Didn't know they existed. My dad had seen them kind of on, he had seen them as he's done his research. I had not realized what the North Cascades were. And we have a picture. They look like that. They call them America's Alps. I knew the Rocky Mountains were coming like weeks down the road. I did not expect to see this 3.5 days in. It was the first, we were 3.5 days in, and it was a 20-mile uphill. When we got to the top, don't go to the next picture yet. When we got to the top of the first incline there were 10 feet of snow on the sides of the road in the middle of June. And I got to be honest, I'm like, we're crazy. Like, I believe we could do anything. I believe we could keep going, but I'm not sure we can do this. But we did. And we just kept pedaling. And I'll tell you this, if you ever want to pedal across the United States, there's no training like just starting. Really just taking the first step, the first pedal. You see, my point today at the end, and I'll give it to you right now, is that you don't always need the faith to finish something. You just need the faith to start. So we conquered that 20-mile uphill, and we pedaled a couple weeks. We pedaled through Washington, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, saw beautiful scenery, met all kinds of wonderful people. And then we came to the Bighorn Mountains, and we faced the largest uphill of our trip, and still to this day, the largest uphill I've ever climbed. It was 33 miles of continuous uphill grade to the top of Granite Pass. That day was just up, 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 up. It just kept going up. I remember sitting down at lunchtime. We sat down to have an orange. We sit on the side of the road, and a swarm of bees. I've never seen a swarm of bees in my life, and they just come right by us. And we just sat there like, nowhere to go, and they just kept going. I kid you not, this is a true story. A little bit later in the day, we stopped to have a power bar. We pull off along. We haven't seen a car or a person in hours, and we could hear coyotes howling in the distance. That is a true story. We quickly got on our bikes and kept pedaling. We reached the top of that pass, Granite Pass, and I have a picture of that. And I'll never forget what my dad said right before we took this picture. He said, "Son, remember this. Remember this feeling. Because this is one of the best feelings you ever have in your life." The accomplishment I felt in that moment was like, wow, I can do this. I can do this. Now, I didn't know Christ when we were doing this. And we were doing this in our own strength. But I did learn that I can accomplish a lot more than I ever realized if I just start out. The Lord said to Abraham, "Leave your country, your people, your father's household, and go to a land I will show you." You don't always have to have the faith to finish. You just have the faith to start. You see, God made a promise to Abraham. He said this. He said, "I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse you, and all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you." God said, if you will simply go, if you will have the faith to start, I will take care of you. You see, we are not changed by making promises to God. We are changed when we believe God's promises to us. And so Abraham left as God told him. Imagine if he didn't go. Now, I believe that God chose him because he knew he would. But imagine if he hadn't. Imagine what he would have missed. You know, back in 2010, I faced one of those decisions. God had been doing a work in my life for a couple months. And a specific moment, it was August 11th of 2010. I was standing in a parking lot of the place I worked. And I know if I've ever heard God speak, he said this. He says, it's time to go. It's time to go. And I'm like, go where? Where am I going to go, God? Where am I going to go? And I remember talking to family members. I remember talking to people that I trust and saying, hey, I believe God is telling me to go. Go where? I don't know. Now, if you know my family members, you know the people around me, a lot of them are very structured, they're very organized, and it just is that that's too irrational for them. I'm that type of guy, I would just do it. So I've learned wisdom, hey, I need to ask people who will tell me the truth. And to every single one, I'm like, I think you're supposed to go. But go where? Do what? I didn't know. I took the next day off. I asked for the next day off. I said, I just need a day to pray and seek the Lord because I think he's doing something and I need a day. So I took the next day off. We live out on 550 near Skytop. There's a little Buffalo Run road that runs behind our house. And there's a creek there and a hill. And when I really like, when I'm around the house, I really have one pair of shoes that I wear, and that's my camouflage Crocs. And so I brought those today. Dave Anderson will appreciate this. He is the world's foremost purchaser of Crocs. He owns like 20 pairs. So this is for Dave Anderson. But that day, I donned my camo Crocs, and I took to the woods behind my house. And I prayed, and I sought the Lord. And I'm like, God, I am getting, people are telling me to go, but I don't even know what that means or what that looks like. And I very specifically remember standing on a rock. I can take you to the rock. There is a rock on the hill behind my house. I very specifically remember, this is not the rock. This rock I found about 10 yards from there. But I very specifically remember standing on that rock, arms raised, and calling out to the Lord. And I just got this picture in my mind. I don't want to fall off of there, Ellie. You're waiting for it. I got this picture in my mind of this little boy at the edge of a pool. And his daddy's down there. And his daddy's going, jump, son, I got you. Jump, son, I got you. And the little boy is terrified to jump into the pool. And the daddy's coaxing him. He's like, go, son, go, I got you. And finally, the boy jumps. And I felt like in that moment, God was saying, Jaron, just jump, son, I got you. Sometime God calls us to go, and we don't know where. And I want to tell you, I didn't get to the moment of jumping that day without taking a lot of little jumps along the way, trusting God to be the author and perfecter of my faith many different times. But that day, I decided I was going to jump. The following day, I walked in, I talked to my boss, and I said, I think God's calling me to go. And so I'm going to go, and he didn't believe me. But he worked with me, and I went. He was very gracious about it. I actually did not know what that meant, so he agreed to work with me. Well, I was having lunch with Bob Gresh about a week later about something else. I was working on a video project for Secret Keeper Girl with him. And I was kind of telling him my story that I'm going. So I'm like, hey, if you know anybody, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just looking for anything. The only thing I got lined up right now is doing some hardwood flooring and doing some painting with friends of mine. And so I'll do it because I believe God has called me to do it. I didn't leave because I didn't love kids. I love kids. I've always loved kids. I always wanted to work with kids since before I was a Christian. I watched my dad be a father to the football players that he coached. And I'm like, I want to help kids like that. So I didn't leave because I was burned out. I didn't leave because I was tired. I left simply because I felt like God told me to go. And Bob told me that day, he says, well, no one knows this, but there's a position open that we have that kind of takes a unique skill set that we didn't know how we were going to fill. And my last day in my former job was the day before my first day at Grace Prep. I transitioned right into the job I have now. And I got to tell you, the last 5 years have been amazing. I went from working with kids on Wednesday night to working with kids on Wednesday night and all day, every day. And I absolutely love it. You see, if we will trust God to go, He is so able to do immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine if we will simply trust Him. We don't need the faith to finish. We simply need the faith to start. Hebrews 11:6 says, and without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone comes to Him must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as an inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Your story can be by faith, I decided to go, or by fear, I decided to stay. I'm going to end with a post I wrote back in March. It was the 20th anniversary of my decision to follow Christ. I'm adventuresome. I like to go. I love traveling with Claire to the Amazon jungle, eating bugs and riding logs across the river. And I love an adventure. But God wires us a certain way. He gives us our talents and abilities. And if we will allow Him to be our author and perfecter, He will amaze you. I wrote this. I love an adventure. I always have. I would think I was born for it. 20 years ago today, I began the greatest adventure of my life. I had no idea when I woke up that Saturday morning in 1995 that my life would be forever changed. I had unknowingly come to the two roads that diverged in the wood. I chose the road less traveled, and I would never be the same. Since then, I've stood on volcanoes in the Andes, eaten bugs with the natives in the Amazon. I have climbed waterfalls in the Caribbean and spent the night in the streets of Kingston, where even the Jamaicans are afraid to go. As Jim Carrey said in the Truman Show, I have been as far as you can go before you start coming back, and I have swum with the fishes while I was there. But the greatest adventure doesn't happen somewhere else on that planet. The greatest adventure is in the people I've had the privilege of knowing over those 20 years, the people that I've called my friends, the lives that have shaped mine. The greatest adventure happens every day all around me. The greatest adventure is what I wake up to every morning, going to work at a place I love and working with people that love me back. I face a new adventure every single day, and all because 20 years ago I met a God who loves me more than I can imagine. I can't wait to see what adventure today's holds. Graduates, don't be afraid to take that first step with God. Trust Him. And when He calls you to go, even when you don't know where you're going, go. Amen.